Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to begin. I'd like to welcome everyone to the June 24th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting and begin by recognizing that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. I don't believe we have anyone attending virtually. Is that correct? Okay. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the question period sign-up sheet, which is on the table by the double doors to my left. Please note that the Council Procedure Bylaw has been updated and questions may be asked related to reports. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to take a few moments to remind those who are attending in person about the rules of decorum. That's you, Inspector Burton.
Hey, none of that.
A meeting of council is intended to be a place where democracy can freely take place in a respectful and safe manner. The council chambers is a workplace, and therefore there are considerations council and staff must make to ensure that a safe work environment exists. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For late items, we have the addition of minutes from the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting held on June 12, 2024, as well as the addition of PowerPoint presentation titled Nanaimo Operations Center / Public Works Yard Project Update for agenda item 6DA. And that's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Could I have a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended? Councillor Eastmere, Mayor Krogh, all those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. Motion for the adoption of the minutes from the June 12th GPC. Councillor Perino and Councillor Thorpe, all those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. Agenda planning, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you again, Chair, and good afternoon. So in your regular agenda package, there is the upcoming topics and initiatives page. And on it, we have not today's meeting information, but the next GPC, which was scheduled for and is scheduled for July 15th, 2024. I say was and is because there was some thoughts from one of you to possibly cancel that meeting as July is a busy month gearing up to the August break. However, we do have scheduled council direction the alternative approval process policy draft that will be coming forward to you, as well as council wishes to see the capital projects, the major capital projects that were identified as council priorities and an update on where those are at, which is also scheduled for the July 15th meeting. Future GPC topics, just of note on the ones outlined on the sheet, the school zone policy update has been actually forwarded on to the Public Safety Committee, and so it is, Council has sent it there. So that's been taken off of this list for now. And incentives that support city plan, that is coming tentatively to the next GPC, which isn't until October 28th. The reason for the delay between July 15th and the next GPC being October 28th is due to the August break. In September, there are 2 statutory holidays, Labor Day as well as Truth and Reconciliation Day, and UBCM is the week of September 16th. So that puts the next GPC for October 28th. And looking for a motion from Council if they agree that the tentative GPC topics, DPA8 Form and Character Design Guidelines, Development Cost Charge Bylaw Update Project, and the Amenity Cost Charge Bylaw Project be considered going forward, as well as the already incentives that support city plan, all of those items for the October 28th meeting, should you choose. If I could get that motion from you, that would be great. If you want to do them individually, that is your prerogative, and as well as hear from you on any upcoming topics and initiatives that you wish to add to this future list.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. I understand we do have a motion coming for a new topic. Question, Councillor Primo?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered what we had on the agenda for November, because it just seems to me like there's that now seems like a lot for the October 28th. So just through you, Chair, I mean, I can move the motion, but I'm just tempted to say maybe we should put some of it into the November meeting.
Yes, so looking forward, through you, Chair, to Councillor Perino, we don't have anything scheduled for November, and if you look on the calendar that's on that same sheet, we do have one GPC in November and one in December. So there is 3 meetings left for the remainder of the year after the July 15th meeting, so we could look at splitting those. I know that the development cost charge bylaw update project and amenity cost charge bylaw project should maybe be put together, so we could look at seeing if staff don't need it set for October, and or we could set it for October now today by a motion and then look at putting some out and rearranging the schedule.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll move that if you like.
Okay, thank you. So that motion has been made for all 4 of those topics on October 28th with staff discretion. I'm hearing for changes if that is too big of an agenda. Is there a seconder? Councillor Gesselbrock, any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you. I don't think this is going to be a huge topic, but something just looking at, you know, we're getting into 2 years left of this term, and it's an item that's in our integrated action plan for this term. And I think regarding trees, that, you know, are an important aspect of infrastructure. And so I was wondering if I could move, I'd like to move that staff provide an update on progress on City Plan Integrated Action Item 16 regarding updating the urban tree canopy management strategy, conducting a tree canopy assessment, and updating tree protection bylaws and development guidelines to bring urban tree management into alignment with city plan objectives and targets. And just speaking to this, I brought this up with...
Councillor Gesselbrock, can we wait for a second,
sorry.
please? Councillor Manley, okay, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I brought this up with CEO Lindsay, just about update on it. He mentioned that it might be a good idea to bring it forward for GPC. So it's a motion. Thank you.
Great. Any discussion, questions, comments? Seeing none, noting that you don't have a date specific to this, just at staff's discretion. Okay, great. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? I see none opposed. And welcome to Councillor Brown, who has joined us virtually. Okay, over to reports. 6D-A, the Nanaimo Operations Center Public Works Yard Project Update. Mr. Rosen, I believe, or Mr. Sims. Pardon me, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just jump in and briefly introduce it before passing it over to Mr. Rosen. So the report in front of you is a reflection of your direction from February, where you asked staff to consider other future options for dealing with the Nanaimo Operations Center and / Public Works building. The recommendation at that time, is laid out before you, is the $48.5 million borrowed to build the Fleet Maintenance Center, the phase 1 of the master plan. But staff did go back and reconsidered a number of other options, and that's what's in front of you this afternoon. Certainly our recommendation remains that you select one of these options to proceed forward. The council's been unequivocal in its acknowledgement and support that the work at Public Works needs doing, and nothing's changed since then. We've just gotten a little older. This is obviously a challenging balance for council to strike, given the cost pressures on this project and other impending projects as well. In concert with finance, we considered alternate ways of funding it, and so that was, you know, to sort of reduce the impact on property taxes. One option is put forward, or for each of, we'll call it a sub-option, I guess. You could fund some of the borrowing repayment from reserves, the asset management reserve. And so just the thing to bear in mind with that is it impacts our asset management plan. Now that has the impact of stretching out the asset management plan. While it's attractive to reduce taxes, at the time of the asset management strategy a year ago, the strategy or the overarching strategy for financing these major capital projects was exclusively borrowing. So this is put forward just for consideration, and of course Ms. Mercer or Ms. Fuller can speak in greater detail on that. So one of the options that that you'll see is considering the two most important components of the overall master plan, and that would be the fleet maintenance and the admin building in one project, in a single project. And while that's, you know, has the downside of bumping up the immediate cost, it also has the positive of getting those two particular sort of more urgent components dealt with. And so Mr. Rosen, Mr. Lonsdale put together the report and put together a bit of the presentation. The intent was really just to sort of frame the discussion for council. And just one last point, I think as the report indicates, our recommendation remains borrowing. Our recommendation remains with an AAP, but this again is council's prerogative to choose. So I'll pass it to Mr. Rosen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Rosen?
Chair, question to speak.
Oh, you're in my seat. That's why that didn't make sense to
Sorry.
me. Go ahead.
Point of order, Chair. We passed a bylaw about respect in this chamber. There's a woman holding a sign at the back that says Mayor and Council passed a bylaw that protects pedophiles, and I'm looking to Ms. Gurry and to the CAO for advice with respect to this matter. And now she's chosen to reverse the sign. Having made that decision, it doesn't impact on the fact that sign is still in this chamber, and I'm concerned about whether or not that in fact breaches a bylaw and whether the chair has any authority whatsoever today to deal with that.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mayor Krogh. I will definitely be looking into this because as far as I understand, the Respectful Spaces bylaw would in fact apply to a sign that says such a thing. So I think that the chair could ask for them to either keep their sign down and or if they refuse to do that, the chair could ask them to leave in accordance with the procedure bylaw.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. And follow-up, could I ask you to take your sign down, please? Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock.
That's okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rosen. Sorry for that interruption.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. So as Mr. Sims mentioned, we've got three options for council. The first option here, council is already well familiar with it. It involves the same scope and borrowing request or budget request as previously outlined. We've secured a grant for part of the funding, so I think that's why it's a little bit lower than before, the $500,000. But it does require, can you hear me okay?
A little closer, please. Thank you.
Okay. But this option does require future borrowing for the administration building because it's not part of this scope. I won't spend a lot of time on this one because council's already familiar with it. The second option is a modified status quo. Now, this is an option we put together to reduce the amount of borrowing required. It involves taking that trailway along around Beban. It's taking that out of the scope, so that would not be completed as part of this project. And so that work was intended to be completed as part of the works in lieu of frontage works and services, which is a normal development requirement. But council does have the purview to not require that. So that, because it's discretionary, we've eliminated it from this option. And the upgrades to the fire training tower, the conversion from wood to gas, that still needs to be done, but we've taken it out of the borrowing. So that would be incorporated into the project plan and impact the project plan in that way. And again, similar to option one, this would require borrowing for the administration building in the future. So option three is probably the most different one that we have put together for council. It involves the fleet maintenance building and administration building, as well as the stormwater management that's required as part of the project. The big difference here is the fleet maintenance building and the administration building would be sort of merged together spatially and placed at the north end of the yard. And the reason we were able to do this is because we've made some trade-offs with this option. So one of the reasons the fleet maintenance building was placed at the south end of the yard was really two primary reasons. One of them was noise. So having very noisy activities away from like offices and crew space that requires a bit more quiet. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason, probably the most important one, is separating out the heavy fleet movements from pedestrian and light vehicle movements. And so that one, with this option, this third option, those would be a little bit closer together because the buildings would be kind of side by side each other. But placing them spatially close to each other in a sort of a separated away from the yard, you can do it all as one project. So it'd be a pretty big project. We're anticipating the borrowing required for that would be about $90 million. But it does provide some certainty. It provides less overall long-term cost because there'd be less exposure to inflation or escalation, as we call it, as well as less borrowing costs. So we've put together a bit of a table that compares the three options all in one spot. So the initial cost is listed there, so $48 million, $44 million, $90 million. That's the borrowing requirement. And then the next column is future borrowing required, so that's a question. So for the first two, the answer is yes. For the third option, we could likely get away with the other upgrades because the yard would still need upgrades to the truck barn, to the purchasing building. They're much smaller projects. They're small enough that we could probably do them without having to require borrowing. Just build them in as part of the regular project planning process in future years. Immediate benefit. So obviously the fleet maintenance facility is the highest, most important component of public works, and that would be resolved with both options 1 and 2. But there still is that outstanding need for office and crew space that it's sort of a short second, it's like a near second. So option 3 does resolve all those urgent needs with the yard. And then continuity of service. So with the fleet maintenance facility, that is obviously a large benefit to public works. However, it casts some uncertainty over the future of the administration building. So is there going to be an appetite to borrow the necessary funding for that project in the future? That's a question. So I think that's why the first two options are just listed as moderate. And then in terms of implementation of the project, the third option is a much larger project, so it'd be a bit more challenging, but we think it's certainly achievable. So potential timeline. So June 24th, that's today. We're hoping council will provide direction on which option is preferred, option 1, 2, or 3. And then on July 15th, we're expecting there'll be a draft AEP policy for consideration by council. And then July 22nd, direction for an AEP and potentially the first 3 readings of a borrowing bylaw for whichever option council directs. And then an AEP could happen in September, October, in the fall. So you can see this is just a timeline for the borrowing process. So if we do move this forward and the AEP is successful, it wouldn't hold up the design process or anything. So we would have an ability to move forward with this in early 2025. I just wanted to mention option 1 is listed as the first option, but we don't want to. There's 3 options available for council here. We don't want to recommend any one particular option. There's 3 good options available here. As Mr. Sims mentioned, there's some funding options. So I think when we presented this previously, it was mostly focused around funding from taxation for debt servicing. There's also, Finance has put together an option, and it's an attachment to the report that looks at funding part of the borrowing costs from the asset management reserve. And I believe Ms. Mercer may want to provide some details on that. So I'll hand it over to her and then open it up for questions when.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Professor.
Thank you. So as it's been mentioned that Ms. Fuller took a look at borrowing some funds out of the General Asset Management Reserve Fund to fund some of the borrowing costs for each project. So under option 1 and 2, we're looking at a 50-50 split, 50% from property taxation, 50% from the General Asset Management Reserve. And then in option 3, it's a 75-25 split. So 75% through property taxation and 25% through the reserve. Now, while there are pros and cons to each option, the pros of using reserve funding is it reduces the property tax increase. And that might help more people in this difficult economic time. It provides some relief there. However, the downside to that is, as Mr. Sims had mentioned, is that our 20-year investment plan assumed borrowing for this project. So this would impact that funding gap that was identified, because we were now taking away from some of the reserves to pay for this project when that wasn't anticipated. So it impacts our 20-year investment plan. And as we did not anticipate that. And as well, future costing of future phases of the project are subject to change, and borrowing will be needed for those. And if we use some of the reserve funding, it reduces the amount of funding available for projects that are currently in the plan or about to be in the plan in the coming future. So there could be some prioritizing of projects that are going to need to be done in the future if some of that reserve funding is used. So those are just there's some benefits, and there's also some negatives to it as well as using reserves. So.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. Lots to chew on. A couple of questions. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thanks. Just to help understand a little bit better, say if we do it from the infrastructure reserve or the asset management reserve, I'm just trying to the proper name, the general asset management reserve. Could we look at it kind of like borrowing from ourselves? Like, say if it's, we'd have to pay however much, borrowing, would we just basically take that chunk out? The reserve would decrease a lot quicker than it was, but then we would just slowly have to pay it back over, a similar amount of time. And say that 1% tax increase that we've had every single year, to build that up, will we just basically have to just keep that going longer to build that reserve back up from what we borrowed from it?
So through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock, so are you thinking of still funding the borrowing from that, or funding the the capital cost of that project out of the reserve?
Well, I don't know how much we have in that reserve currently, but just, whatever we can handle by dropping that down, basically borrowing from ourselves and then repaying it back to the point that it was at before we borrowed it, but 10, 20 years down the line, and sort of doing the modeling for that. I guess, my question is that possible to do that? And is that kind of what's being suggested? And that would save us sort of the, the extra cost for borrowing from the bank, basically.
So the funding payback into that reserve would come from taxes.
Yeah.
So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, really, because you're either taking that funding now and putting that in the budget now as you're funding that project through taxation, or you do the 50-50 split and you up that 1% or make it 1.25 or 1.5. It's still coming from taxation. So to replenish that reserve.
For sure, I guess one method would be, it's all going to come from taxation eventually. It basically just extends the time that taxation spread out over, correct?
Yeah.
And so by borrowing that chunk of money from the bank, there is interest on it that we wouldn't be paying. And so if we are able to, the highest amount of money that we can pull out of that asset management reserve, we're basically not having to pay that interest. And depending on how much is in that reserve, we can push out the time that we have to pay it back by spreading out that taxation over a longer period of time.
I'll let Ms. Fulla add some comment here.
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock. So right now, your projected closing balance in the General Asset Management Reserve at the end of 2024 is just under 13.9 million. So you don't actually have enough funds available to borrow for this project. if council wished to use some money from the asset management reserve, you could probably take $6 to $7 million. 7 would make things a little tight if we have projects come in over budget, and maintaining our minimum reserve balance, plus do the projects we already have planned in the current financial plan. But if you did that, then we wouldn't have the funding available to fund any of the debt servicing from the general asset management reserve unless we reprioritize other projects, which of course is a prerogative of council, but it would mean reworking our project plan to do that. So one of the reasons I didn't suggest taking money from the reserve is if you were looking at trying to lower the impact to residents and businesses on their taxes of moving forward this project, funding debt servicing from the asset management reserve, while it will incur higher interest costs over the life of the project, was a way we were able to make the biggest impact to the property tax impact. Taking $6 or $7 million from the reserve, for option 1, that would have moved your cost from $74 to somewhere between 63 to 65. So not a significant change, whereas funding half the debt servicing basically halved the cost. So we were trying to give you an option that would lower the impact to residences and businesses if that was council's desire.
Okay, so it's just the debt servicing that is being provided. Okay, for one, I thought there's a lot more money in the general asset reserve. Maybe it's, don't we have one reserve that we have like $60 million in it? Maybe looking at some of those reserves and whacking their, the amount that's in them down, just like basically borrowing from ourselves and then paying back.
With the, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock, with a lot of the reserves, there are a lot of plans attached to them and replacement. So taking any money out of those, and there isn't a lot of general unallocated money in those reserves, as $100 million is a lot of money, but when you start trying to fund all the replacements and work within the city, that doesn't go very far. So we could look at funding from some reserves, but there isn't a lot of options there. So without impacting renewal and replacement of other things, other projects in the city.
Right, so like in terms of what I'm hearing, there's not a lot of unallocated reserves. In terms of allocated reserves of that 100 million or however, what that quantity is, over what length of time is the budgeting? Is it like over a 20-year period that we have allocated that reserve funding, or is it within a 5-year period? Because I guess some of the things that are like allocated for 15, 20 years down the road, that there's a bit more, wiggle room in that situation in terms of just extending our payback time.
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, the challenge would be, though, that in years 1 through 5 of the current financial plan, we only have in the asset management reserve, as I said, about $6 to $7 million that we could free up for this project. You have your general capital reserve, but that has a balance of, it has just under $5 million. So, I mean, we could allocate that to the project, but then that funding wouldn't be available for other projects we are bringing forward. Other than that, we don't really have other reserve funds that would be applicable to this project. You do have your general financial stability reserve, but as per best practice, that is our fallback reserve in case we don't collect from a major taxpayer, we have unexpected city expenses, and we just have barely over the minimum balance there. And you have to keep in mind, as our city budget grows, that 45 days to 60 days, I think it's off the top of my head, minimum balance we require, that minimum balance keeps going up as our operating budget grows. So we would definitely fall below that if you wanted to borrow from that. That is an option for council, but then you just have to consider that funding's not available for other things and the time it takes back, and then would we pay that back through surplus? Our policy actually says that if we fall below our minimum balance, our reserve policy, that we have to budget to replace it, that we have to have a replacement plan. So there is some options there, but they all come with consequences. You need to weigh your options and your risk tolerance.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you,
Appreciate the information and the options, which I read through quite carefully. I don't think I'm a fan of option 3 because I don't care for the funding formula and the higher initial cost, and I certainly don't relish the thought of depleting reserves. And more importantly, perhaps you note in the report that it leads to a slightly less than ideal layout of the yard. And without going into details of that, it seems to me if we're spending this much money renewing our public works yard, we want a yard that works as efficiently as possible with an ideal layout. I was drawn towards option 2, although I personally very much support the concept of the Bevan Trail and the improvements to the fire tower. But I notice in option 2 that it says under disadvantages, it leaves the urgent administrative and city crew crew space needs with an uncertain future. And you did mention that, Mr. Rosen, sorry. But could you just elaborate on that? What would that look like?
Through the chair to Councillor Thorpe. So what that means is, under that scenario, the scope doesn't include the administration building. That includes the offices and the crew space. So it leaves that phase of the project for future sort of securing of the financial means to move forward with it. So that's what we mean by an uncertain future. It's just the funding aspect of the next phase is uncertain at this time.
I see. Okay, thank you. And to me, I see the crew space, not to mention the administrative space, as really one of the most important aspects of this project. So that really gives me pause. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Brown, I see you. You are a couple people down. Mayor Krogh.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. And not to put either Mr. Sims or Mr. Lonsdale or Mr. Rosen on the spot, so to speak, but the recommendation, that which we supported, was basically option 1. The AAP process had its difficulties, and so it's back in front of us again with 2 more potential options. I guess I need to hear why, if that was the workable and sensible approach and viewed as such previously, we should be considering options 2 and 3 now.
Chair, thanks through to your worship. I think with council asking us to go and consider options, we wanted to take a step back and make sure that we weren't discounting the possibility of other things that might be out there. Because we've created a master plan, doesn't mean that we can't pause and reconsider it. And so that was the driver for the 2 options in front of you, or the 3, pardon me, or the 2 in addition to the recommended option of last year. So as Mr. Rosen mentioned, the question mark around future financing for the admin building put that option forward to combine the 2 as a potential.
I'm going to ask, if I may, an even harder question in some respects, because staff have put these options in front of council. From the perspective of Public Works in general, what's the preferred option of the 3? And if no one can answer that, I'll understand, or wants to answer it, I'll understand as well. It's a horrible question to come from a member of council, and I understand that, but.
Thanks, Chair. I think.
I don't hear sincerity in your voice.
We're very conscious of the challenges that this project has brought forward to the community, and I think we're also conscious of the need for a functional public works yard. And that was what sort of drove the thinking around option 3. But we're very, very aware of the challenges that council faces with budgets, reserves, and future tax increases as well. So it's option 1, as I mentioned, remains the recommended option as long as it's accepted, or we know that in the future the admin building is coming next in the mix of all of the other capital projects.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. I very much appreciate that answer. I'll have a lot to say when it gets to debate on the motion, and appreciate the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Krog, noting there is no motion. And we probably want discussion for a bit. Councillor Manley?
Sure. I have a couple of questions about we put aside 1% a year for asset management. What does that total up to a year? How much money does that equate to? I imagine it changes every year, but it's just a ballpark.
Through the chair to Councillor Manley. So in 2024, we're putting 12.6 million into the General Asset Management Reserve. In 2025, it'll be approximately 14.1. Then it goes up to about 15.7, then 17.3 million, and then in 2025, 19 point, sorry, it's just off my screen here. Right around 19 million. Now that will change slightly because it is the current increase is 1% of taxes, and 1% of taxes does change depending on growth and other factors, but those are the estimated contributions in the current approved financial plan.
Okay. And the general capital reserve, that would be like potential infrastructure reserve, or is that just for any kind of capital projects?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley, the General Capital Reserve is a operating reserve, so it's not governed by a statutory bylaw. Generally, we have used it to fund capital infrastructure, but there is discretion there as it is an operating reserve. And generally, the funding to that reserve comes from an allocation of surplus.
Okay. And have we considered doing a 1% tax increase overall just to set aside money for future infrastructure needs? We've seen a list of a lot of different infrastructure projects, and I'm just thinking about how the tax fluctuation happens with different borrowing, and I'm curious about whether we've thought about doing something like that just as a steady amount, so that taxpayers know what to expect.
Through the chair to Councillor Manley. So the 1% that we contribute, the 1% annual increase to property taxes, and the set funding we have from property taxes for the General Asset Management Reserve is meant to smooth those bumps and dips in the project plan, but of course that reserve only applies to the renewal of existing infrastructure. For new infrastructure, we don't have a dedicated funding source. In the past, we have used the Community Works Fund to fund a fair number of our new infrastructure projects, but of course we are waiting to hear what that new program looks like and what the requirements will be for how we may spend it. But that is funding that right now is not accounted for in our 2024 to 2028 financial plan. We do know we will be getting funding, we just don't know how we can spend it. So that potentially will have money available for some of those other major capital projects that we're looking at, or projects that council desires to add to the plan, or funding some of our current projects to free up money for other things. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough information on that funding at this point. If council wanted to allocate a portion of property taxes each year to put in reserve for new infrastructure, that is definitely something that could be considered in the financial plan. But we do have that annual 1% increase and the dedicated funding going to the asset management reserve already that is supposed to help that 20-year investment plan and our infrastructure funding gap.
And just pardon me for a moment, what was the fund that you were just referencing that we're unsure of the amount from?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley, it's the gas tax funding. So I think it's called, we call it the Community Works Fund, but I think it's called Building Canada.
Okay. And then I'm curious about, so the asset management reserve, that's there for emergency replacement, but like that's for planning, but also that would be for situations like what Calgary just went through with a major water pipe burst. They're looking at a big bill for that. That would come out of asset management reserve, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley. So we created 3 asset management reserves back in 2013. That was one of the recommendations from our asset management update. We have one in the general fund, the sewer fund, and the water fund. And so that funding is available to renew existing infrastructure and so we don't have to increase user rates or property taxes like a big bump in one year because we have a major project, like next year we're replacing the roof at the Bevan Complex. We also keep a minimum balance in that reserve, and that is for dealing with things that might come up, a sudden failure or a project coming in over budget, and it's something that's required and necessary, that we can fund that from there.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, just one question about the, so the different plans here, the third plan is not optimal because of the layout of the buildings. It's based on what can be torn down to make room for what's coming, so that the admin building and the vehicle maintenance building would be side by side or something? Is that, and that's not optimal based on noise and traffic and things like that? Is that correct?
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, just option 3, it was said it's not optimal because of the way the buildings would be placed. The placement of the buildings is because we have to keep other buildings standing while we do the construction, and so they would be forced into one part of the yard rather than separated. That's correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley. So in the original master plan, we had separated the fleet maintenance building from the admin building for 2 primary reasons. One of them was noise, because the fleet building has a lot of noise that's created out of it through its activities. Yeah. And the office building is a little bit sensitive to that. So that's one of the reasons we'd separated it. Another reason we had separated it is we were trying to keep a lot of the heavy fleet away from the lighter fleet and the pedestrian activities with the crew and so on and so forth. So when we looked at putting together a more comprehensive option, a third option for council, we looked at where we could combine the fleet maintenance building and the admin building into one location that could be constructed while the yard continues to operate. Mm-hmm. So you can't take up too much of the yard at the same time. You have to continue to have a functioning yard for the several years during construction. And so that north end of the yard was really the available space that we had enough room where we could position the 2 buildings. And we had even worked out an option where we had one large building. But that had some issues around, with the fleet maintenance building, for example, it needs a lot of outside doors, like overhead doors, and you need a lot of outside wall space. And so that option was a little bit tricky, so we didn't actually include that as an option because it wasn't really that functional operationally. The one that we've presented to council here with the 2 separated buildings, we think that's a good balance between having the noise separated, because we can do things to mitigate the noise. We can put in noise attenuation. We can make sure the fleet has the garage doors closed. We can put in, better windows, like triple glazing if we needed to. We could put in better windows. We can mitigate the noise issue. And I think we can also mitigate the conflict between heavy and light vehicles. I think, so from our standpoint, that option it's a viable option. We think it's a good option. It's got a few trade-offs compared to the ideal master plan we had put forward, but we think given the certainty that it would provide to Public Works, it's a good option. So I think that's.
And if I recall correctly in the report, it says it saves about $10 million. And
I'll turn this over to Mr. Lonsdale. He's very familiar with the detailed numbers on this.
Okay.
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Manley, yes, that's correct. It's approximately, excuse me, approximately $10 million would be saved through just escalation between today, let's say, the last time that we had the cost estimate run on this, to the projected date where we would be able to complete construction on the administration building. By drawing that forward, we're paying in today's dollars, which are projected to be significantly lower than those future dollars.
And then, there's a lot of phases, a lot of other parts to this project, and so initially we were talking about $160 million. We would be reducing that $10 million. The remaining buildings are in the $60 million range, is that correct? That we'd still be looking at that kind of?
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Manley, yes, the remaining work which isn't captured within options 1, 2, or 3 would still need to be done and could be completed over time. One of the big advantages with option 3, which I think is what you're specifically referring to, is that we wouldn't necessarily need to go to borrowing in order to fund those options, those improvements to the space. The nature of them is such that the budget is lower, the complexity is lower. It's something that we could probably reasonably integrate within our yearly capital planning and complete that way. And so there would be a future or an additional reduction in costs, which would be the reduction in costs associated with borrowing, the interest payments, for lack of a better term. So it's not that those wouldn't need to get done, it's that they would still get done, they'd be funded in a different manner, they'd be managed in a different manner. But the two biggest elements to the Nanaimo Operations Center master plan across all phases is the administration building and the fleet building. And so if we do those up front, it's a higher initial cost, but overall it's a significant reduction in the cost of the project, looking across all 4 phases and a 20-year to more year payback period.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. Councillor Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just really prepared when it's appropriate to move that we proceed with the project as originally scoped and get the AAP bylaws prepared.
Was that a motion?
Sure, if there's a seconder.
I saw a seconder immediately from Mayor Krog. I do want to note we have a couple people on the speakers list, so I wonder if we could just sit on that for a moment, and we could go to questions and then entertain motions once the speakers list is over.
Sounds good.
Seeing no objections, Councillor Perino, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and just a few questions. We were talking about the administration building, Mr. Rosen, and I'm just wondering, does the administration building need to be on the same work yard as the fleet maintenance building?
Yes, through the Chair to Councillor Perino, yes, the administration building does need to be nearby because it includes a lot of the crew space. The normal operational space of the yard as well as offices. So it does need to be either on the site or very, very close to the site. It needs to be a part of the site.
Okay. And just out of interest, how many staff would be in the administration building? And I realize that's at today's numbers, but just give me a scope of how many staff we're looking at. Any idea? I realize
we don't have the number off the top of our head.
Chair, it's about 130 to 140 people.
Okay.
And then another 20 would be in the fleet maintenance side.
Okay.
Of things, yeah.
The reason I asked was just I wanted to get some scope. Was it 20? But when you're looking at well over 100, it makes quite a difference. Okay, the next question that I have is, when you look at your potential timeline, just out of interest, it says spring 2025 borrowing process begins. Fall 2025 first borrowing occurs. When does the actual construction start, if it was to go ahead?
Through the Chair to Councillor Perino. So I think if this goes forward and the borrowing gets approved,
yes,
the project would follow into a natural or a normal project timeline.
Yes.
So we would start design in 2025.
Yes.
And likely as soon as Council had adopted a financial plan that included this as a budget line item, we would be able to start moving that forward. So I think we're anticipating typically a project like this would require about a year of design work.
Yes.
And then a couple of years of construction. So we're looking at about a 3-year process, potentially starting in early 25.
Construction is starting in 2025?
No,
Construction
design.
Design
So
starting.
construction wouldn't start until 26 at the earliest.
And the reason that I'm asking that question, Chair, is that when we look at projected increases in our taxes, I'm just wondering, as we get into 2026, 27, and 28, the taxes do appear to be going down, we're hoping. And I'm just wondering does this affect, because we're not actually starting the construction until at least 2026, does that allow us to, I'm just wondering how that affects our tax base. What I'm trying to do is minimize it for 2025 because we're already so, with everything we've got, without even this starting. I'm trying to figure out how would it affect 2025 and 2026, 27, 28. And I realize I see that, but does that include what we've already talked about when we were talking about the tax increases before?
So through the Chair to Councillor Perino, so yes, we started with the starting spot from our current 5-year plan.
Right.
But it does not include additional
Exactly.
any of the business cases. So, or changes to estimates or anything. So it's what we knew at the time that that bylaw was.
Exactly.
We wouldn't borrow. We would, in a sense, cash flow it. So we would only
Yes.
borrow the money that we needed
When
each
we
year.
need it.
Yes. So we wouldn't be going out and borrowing $48.5 million right out of the gate, or $90 million.
Okay.
We would borrow, we would cash flow it, and we have 5 years to draw on that money. So we would determine how much money we needed in each year and only draw what we needed. And if we didn't need the full 48.5 or $90 million,
Whatever
we
we
would only, whatever the end, like, we would only borrow what we needed.
Okay. It's just that because it's already stated to be high next year, this actually would not necessarily affect it next year. It's the following years.
Through the chair, yes. So for 2025, there would be a minimal impact. There would be a little bit, but because the borrowing wouldn't happen till in the fall of 2025, there would be a smaller impact. So really, the first hit, if in that sense, would
Yes.
start in 2026.
2027?
26. So it's 26,
Yes.
and then it would, depending on what cash flow we needed in each year, it would just
Yes.
gradually get, yeah.
Okay, and my final question is, as it appears, we have Councillor Brown that is already suggesting a motion for the status quo, the first option. What in fact happens to the administration building? That's my fear. By not doing it, how much longer do we? Any thoughts on that? I realize it's up to us. I get that, but it's not easy to say that when we're looking at long-term borrowing just for the fleet management building.
Correct, Chair, just through the chair to Councilor Perino, it depends on what, how the world unfolds as far as what projects we build as part of that major capital. And it's always this balance that council has to strike between the needs of the community and the strategic needs as well. Like the South End Community Center is another good example
Huge
that will
need.
be
Huge.
that will be in front of you and will be thrown into this mix. And we don't want to be having this discussion in these isolated pockets either, right? We don't want to have, okay, we're just doing the Fleet Maintenance Center and we don't see anything else. We want to know that all of these things are on the table and for council to move around. So that's a long-winded way of saying that the timing is going to depend on how things unfold. As you have more and more financial pressure, that's potentially going to draw the projects out.
It's just that having visited the yard, Chair, I've just, I think to myself, how are you going to do without an administration building? I mean, it's pretty rough today.
To the chair,
Well over 100 staff.
with, as noted, in the report, we're already bringing in yet another trailer to house a number of other staff. It's, another temporary trailer that will be there for 20 years if we didn't do anything.
Yes.
And the one thing to just point out with the admin building is that this would see parks operations crews coming over to Public Works as well. So that's helping to deal a little bit with the situation and crowding at the Parks Yard on Prideaux.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. Just to ask again, so by doing the admin building and the fleet maintenance building, there's probably about a $10 million cost savings by doing them at the same time. Did I hear that correctly?
Through the chair to Councilor Gesselbrecht, there's approximately $10 million in cost savings with escalation or inflation. That doesn't include any costs for debt servicing. That's simply just saying, we're thinking that the admin building would come around at about this time and cost this many dollars. And if we were to get moving on that 2024 and 2025, we'd save around $10 million based on inflation.
Okay. Are there any potential cost savings of just doing them both at the same time, as opposed to like in phases in terms of having to start things up again and mobilize construction folks and just the the disruption to operations and that?
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, yes, there would be. Generally, when you're going to market with something larger, then you can attract more competitive bids and get a bit of an economy of scale kind of pricing going. As well, the kind of day-to-day operational costs that are impacted by this work, I would anticipate would also be lessened. So instead of having, as Mr. Sims said, we're not quite sure how many years worth of work happening through the yard, but if we were to capture that within 5 to 6 years, as opposed to something more protracted than that, the level of disruption would similarly lessen, and the internal costs would be reduced as well.
Okay, thank you. Then just, I don't know if I don't know if I heard correctly when you're talking about just borrowing what we need. I guess when I'm looking at the costs, so that value engineering report that was done, the last Class D estimate that was done was in October 2023.
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, I don't have it in front of me, but that sounds about right, yes. Since then, and to prepare this report, we had some cost estimates rerun based on current dollar figures.
Okay, like, because I think I just lost the report in front of me, but I think like in that, the 2023 estimate, which I think we went out to borrowing for, the admin building was like at 15 million and the vehicle bay was at 20 million. Does that sound in the right ballpark, or is that?
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, I think you may have them reversed. I think it's around $16 million or so. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but around $16 million or so for fleet building and around $21 million or so for the administration building.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess like for the borrowing of everything, I mean, there's the escalation that's occurred since then. Just like, what is the additional costs up to that $90 million? Like, assuming they escalated by $5 or $10 million, that we have to go borrow out for? Is that kind of what we're avoiding? We don't have to borrow more than we expect to need. We just can borrow for the cost of the build.
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, so the pricing that we were talking about for the administration buildings, for example, the way that the estimates are prepared is to come up with a per square meter cost for those buildings, and then separately from that, escalation is applied to it. So they'll estimate each building as if it's going to get built today, and then they'll run it through a model for, hey, we think we're going to get to this in 2032. So what's going to happen between today and 2032? And then that comes up with a separate cost that gets added onto each phase of the project. I'm not sure if that kind of answers your question or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, like, say, like, of the $48 million that we were set to go borrow just for the fleet maintenance building, whose cost was $20 million, that extra $25 million or $28 million, is that just contingency and other elements like the potential cost escalation, or?
Again, if I may, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, I understand now. So with that original $48.5 million, that included the fire training center fuel conversion, the trail in the park, as well as the stormwater project. As you said, it also included contingencies for each one of those elements. It included design fees for those elements, permitting fees, costs for third-party utilities, so things like hydro and gas and data and that sort of thing. There's quite a bit kind of wrapped up in there on top of that core cost that you're referring to of that $16 million for the fleet building.
Okay, great, thank you. And just back to the conversation that I heard earlier about the borrowing, was it, I'm sorry, I missed that. Like, are we going to do it differently compared to how we did the bylaw before in terms of paying what we actually borrow? I missed the start of that conversation there.
So through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, so we would still do the bylaw the same. So if you picked option one, the bylaw would be to borrow up to $48.5 million. But when we wouldn't draw all of that at once, we would look at 3 or 4 years of costing, and we would only draw the amounts down. We would only draw on that borrowing as we needed it. Mm-hmm. So if after 4 years and it was only $45 million to do the project, that's all we would borrow.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Which is the same as what we that's the same process that we had for the last two.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gesselbrock. I don't see any other questions or comments, so Councillor Brown, over to you.
Thanks, Councillor Hemmons. I'd like to move the motion as stated earlier to carry on with the project as originally scoped for the AAP bylaws. Just a second, or I'll speak to it.
Thank you. That's been seconded by Mayor Krogh. Go ahead.
Thank you. As council knows, I have typically voted against this. I really appreciate the additional financing options presented, and I'm sure there's many more, but refining those into at least some options, I appreciate that. So thank you to Ms. Mercer and Ms. Fulla and all those that worked on it. I think with respect to my previous opposition, I just want to say really well done to all the staff that contributed to the information during that second AAP. I felt it was presented in a very fulsome way that helped provide a lot of clarity and answered a lot of questions both for myself and for the community. And I think, I saw that community discourse change with that information presented. I felt I was 99% of my questions were able to be answered. And so I have the level of confidence now to support this project as scoped. Again, appreciate the options and the different iterations, and I'd be pleased to support getting those bylaws prepared and going through that process again, and hearing back from the community on that one way or the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Mayor Krogh.
Thank you very much, Chair. I much appreciate this and appreciate the work of staff and the advice and the answers to my questions, which I appreciate were challenging. Option 2, for instance, is off the table completely for me. It's kind of like me being asked to attend an audience with King Charles, going out buying new shoes, new suit, fully dressed, and then skipping the haircut. The smallest cost of the whole affair. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and moreover, we'd lose $500,000, which would go towards the trail. The third option has some temptation for me. I think we have to be bigger and bolder and more in tune with the vibrant city that we are and the needs that have been reflected in the long-range plan for the whole site. Having said that, however, I'm very conscious of the fact that if we go for option 3, then we are limiting our ability to borrow money for a number of other projects which everyone is thinking and talking about. I know that on Saturday, I was there early, and I suspect some other councillors would have been there later in the day. I was out at the Paddling Kayak Center on Long Lake, and that's still a project that I support. The whole community may not be seen as a priority, but the Oliver Woods equivalent in the south end, the rec center, the police station's coming, there are all waterfront walkway. We all know what the list of projects are. And if we put $90 million into this project, then again, it will limit our ability to borrow money for that. Having said that, I'm also conscious of the fact, and I'll mention a very dramatic example where a municipality didn't pay much attention to its basic infrastructure. Walkerton, we know how that ended. And more recently, Calgary. We have lots of pipes underground, and Mr. Sims, Mr. Elliott, Mr. Rosen, Mr. Lonsdale, we're very conscious of that. Goodness knows if we have borrowed a great deal of money and something like that occurs in several places all at once, which it can with the aging pipe, even though it's being replaced rapidly, and we've got the new pipes in the ground. Again, I'm concerned about that. Candidly, if we'd had good advice in the first AAP or the second AAP had gone somewhat differently, I would like to think, and I still do believe, that the city of Nanaimo, the majority of its citizens, have confidence in this council. And that was council's decision to proceed with the AAP. We put it in front of the people because we believed it was the right approach, it was the correct approach, it was the logical approach, it was the staff recommended approach. I am perfectly prepared to support going back to the public, particularly now that more information, as Councillor Brown has pointed out when he made the motion today in speaking to it, has pointed out that the citizens are now much more aware of the importance of what is needed at the Public Works Yard. And so I have no hesitation in saying, let's go for the motion. Let's support it. Let's get it out there and get it done. There will be a time for full referendum on various other projects that are needed and important to a growing city. But things haven't gotten any better at the Public Works Yard. They're only going to deteriorate. This was a logical, sensible first step. It's not breaking the bank. It's a good option for our workers and for public safety and the public interest. So I am happily going to support option 1 and hope that the rest of council will as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Perino?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of statements. I agree with everything that you had said, Mayor Croak. The struggle that I was having was option 3 allowed us to get the administration building done. But you had said that, Mr. Rosen, you had said that we could probably do those other projects that are not within that option 3. We could probably do them without borrowing over time. And so what I'm wondering is, because my concern was to borrow 90 million, we've got to do the, we've got to do the South End Community Center and the walkway and all these other projects. Can we do the administration building with that same thought in mind? Because if we're going from the 90 million down to 48 million, and you had said that you felt that we could do some of those other projects, do you see what I'm saying? Is that possible to do that? Am I skipping too many layers there?
Through the chair to Councillor Perino. So the other projects that we're talking about beyond the admin building and the fleet maintenance building, they're mostly interior renovations.
Okay.
So it's interior renovation to the truck barn, interior renovation to the fleet, or the store's warehouse,
okay,
as well as some reorganization of some bulk materials and some smaller things like a facility to deal with like washing trucks and fueling stations and those sorts of things. And they're not small projects.
No.
But they're sort of like modest projects, I would say. They're of the size that you could conceivably fund them through the regular project planning process.
Okay.
Still be challenging, but you could conceivably do that. With the administration building as a standalone project, I don't know if we have an actual number for that one phase, but it's so large that you'd never be able to build it in as part of a regular planning process. So that's why borrowing would be the way we would have to move forward with that one in the future.
Okay, but I thought, Mr. Longsdale, I thought you were saying that the administration building was around 21? Am I off on that? 21 million?
Those would be construction-only costs. When you look at the entire project package, you'd be looking at a similar, potentially more than the phase 1 cost as a standalone.
Okay, so we're looking at years away. Okay. Okay, I agree, and I'll definitely vote in favor of this. I only want to say I happened to listen to a podcast just this past weekend, Ms. Fulla, and I don't want to embarrass, I said to her I want her autograph when she was, it was all about taxation and how it works. It was really, really beneficial for those of us who don't know how to explain all of it. Ms. Slater and Ms. Fulla really did a great job on the podcast, and I hope that we do the same. Should this go forward with the vote and so forth, I hope we do the same for this, because it's helpful for people to listen for 20 minutes or half an hour on, the reasons why and how it works and how the funding works, and just to hear the reasons why. It was certainly helpful to me, and I hope I embarrassed you just a little bit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Perino. Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. I was really in favor of option 3 because a lot of the concerns I heard from people during the AAP process was that they were unclear about the future borrowing phases, and this really addresses that. And this would be us showing the leadership that's needed to get this entire project done. And will provide the clarity for people about the financial implications going forward. And it doesn't just do the fleet maintenance building, it also looks after the parts I'm actually a lot more concerned about, which are the administration and the working space for other employees. And to me, it doesn't make any sense to build a standalone fleet maintenance building. I think rolling that together with the admin space makes so much more sense. And just getting it done with this one AAP for the future borrowing. I definitely see the argument on the other side as far as not having the borrowing space for other projects. Our borrowing capacity is in the realm of,
Through the chair, we're at about 13% of our borrowing limit, which is about, I'm going to say 65 million. Or is our, sorry, I might have.
I thought it was like 160 million.
Yeah, we had about, for 2022, I don't have the latest version, but we had borrowing capacity for debt servicing of about $44.5 million. I do know it's higher now, but I'm not.
So how is option 3 even an option then if it requires?
That service, so all of the interest and debt payments.
Yeah.
Not the borrowing.
Yeah, so again, for me, I think I would really love to bite the bullet on this and just go with option 3 and work out the other projects in other ways. So that's where I'm landing on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastmere. Councillor Manley.
Thank you. I'm kind of torn the same way as Councillor Eastmere. I get the need for both of these buildings and to get this infrastructure in place. I'm curious, we've gone for option 1, but there's an A and a B to it. And the B is to use some of the reserve funds, which we could take 6 to 7 million now, and we get approximately 12 million, 14 million a year on, but 50% would be 24 million. So that would be over time that we would be drawing from the reserve funds as we go through the construction process. And then I'm wondering if we just went straight for borrowing with this, why could we not maybe go for the admin building using the reserve funds? And how much longer, what time do you need between these two phases, between the fleet building and the admin building to keep the public works yard functional, but also to put those buildings in the placement that is optimal for the operation of the yard? So what kind of, how many years between construction would you need to do that?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley. So with the third option we provided council, those, the two buildings are close enough together. They're at an extremity of the yard, so we think we can do that all as one phase. So both buildings would be under construction at the same time under that
if you did
scenario.
them separately, if we just went for option A right now, and then we were looking how many years between to do it the optimal way, so we would be tearing down or moving things around as.
So within the yard, you need to have some swing space and so on. So when the fleet maintenance building is under construction at the south end of the yard, we have to move a lot of parking and other things, wash and things up to the north end of the yard or make them temporary and so on. There'll be a time when we can move those things back into the fleet maintenance building and sort of reclaim that space. And then there's a lag in design of about a year to get an administration building ready to go and so on and so forth. So I think in an ideal world, let's just say it takes 3 years to build a fleet maintenance building. So 1 year for design, 2 years for construction. If it takes a year to work out the financing, you want to work back where you have the right timing to start that financing piece. It's probably in the design process of the fleet maintenance building. You want to get started with developing that funding program for the administration building if you want them to be sequential.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm thinking is doing it sequentially. And if we are going to borrow, if we're going to go for scenario A, where we're borrowing all of this for the fleet maintenance building, then we may be looking at the admin building and using the reserve funds towards the admin building, but also planning that as the second phase so that it's built out in the way that's optimal for use of space and and that we're not waiting too long to get the admin building done. So I'll support option A for now, but I just wanted to put that idea on the table that if we're going for scenario A and leaving those reserve funds from scenario B, that we put those reserve funds aside to get the admin building done using reserve funds and eliminate the borrowing on it, if that's feasible to the finance department.
Through the chair, so you're looking at $25 million worth of an admin building. That's going to be, that'll be a tall order.
Right. I'm just curious because in scenario B, we're basically looking at $24 million in reserve funding if we were doing 50-50.
Over 20 years.
Yeah, okay.
But if you're, we would need to draw that money all today.
Right.
And so funding it over like $3 million a year versus over 20 years versus
right.
drawing it all down at the same time. That's.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about drawing it all today because the first phase is going to take 3 years.
Yeah.
Start the planning for the second phase and then start construction of the second phase in 4 years, say. Okay. By then we've built up that reserve to a certain point, so we wouldn't need the long-term borrowing for it.
Okay. We will crunch the numbers for that.
Okay, just an idea, just a thought, because of course going through these AAPs has, not been an easy process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. Councillor Geselbrock.
Thanks, Chair. I can see that there is a little bit of wanting to entertain option 3 from council, and I definitely think that option 3 is something that we should entertain more seriously on a number of fronts. One, in terms of need, I'm not sure when phase 2 is going to happen for the administration building, probably 2 years from now once it's done, and so it's going to be right on the back of whatever else we're borrowing, dragged out. I know that the need for administrative space is now. It was actually 10 years ago. I know of several municipal employees, ex-municipal employees that worked out of that, and they left for a large reason because they just didn't want to come to work in a stuffy cubicle in a portable, modular building for the amount of responsibility that they had. I think throughout this whole process, and I do think that our communications is going to be better and more dialed in, but there is a lot of confusion over phase 1, phase 4, $160 million build out of the public, the Nanaimo Operations Center, and I think this option 3 gives us an opportunity to get it all done in one shot. The rest of the phases are smaller internal, that can do with much smaller borrowing, short-term borrowing, done. We can go out and get the public works yard done with option 3, which are the 2 main big builds that need to get done. In terms of affecting longer-term borrowing or other options, I don't think it's going to make a difference whether we go out for $48 million and then go out to the community for the South End Community Association or the Waterfront Walkway, whether it's $48 million with just one fleet maintenance or $90 million to get it all done and over. And then the story around the public works yard in terms of what the community is going to be paying attention to is over. And from what is out there circulating in terms of the cost of updating the Nanaimo Operations Center, which is, people are throwing around numbers of $100 and something million. We're going to get it done in 90 million now, and it's going to be over. There's not going to be phase 2, 3, 4. It's very clear. There's very little room for misinterpretation. Going that option, my only skepticism is, okay, now we're changing the narrative a little bit from what we were currently going for, and that could be confusing, but I think the confusion's already passed, and if we're just very clear in our communications from this point forward and really telling that story that we can get our public works yard updated, in this one phase of borrowing that I think that people will be pleased, and especially having staff go and come back after reflecting on it. And I know that there's some drawbacks in terms of, you know, where the positioning of the buildings are, but I do think in the grand scope of things are minor in terms of the risk of having to go do another AAP for the public works yard in 2 years' time from now, maybe right at the end of our term. I don't know exactly when the timing is for it, for something that's like needed. And when go to the community who is concerned about finances, that just the money saved from the cost escalation is something that we know we're gonna have to do with the administration building, saving $10 million alone on cost escalation, let alone money that's saved from just doing them both at the same time, the scale of the build. I think that it's a cheaper option, and I think it takes out the confusion for the public and actually meets the current needs, not even the current needs, but the past needs that we've already articulated in terms of admin space and that now. And so I don't agree. I'm not supportive of option 1, and if it fails, I'll definitely be putting forward to explore further option 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gesselbrock. Councillor Thorpe?
Thanks, Chair. I'll keep it fairly brief. I agree with Councillor Gesselbrock on the need for, of course, fulsome communication outreach on this project, as with every other project. And I go back to Councillor Brown's earlier comments that I also in the community heard a change in response due to the efforts of Mr. Sims and his staff during the AAP process when we got the word out about what this project was all about, why we wanted to do it in a certain way, why we wanted to include certain items. And I think the public was really starting to have a better understanding. And to me, I think we simply need to have the courage to stay the course and say what we proposed was a good project and it was going to be done in a good way. And I think that if we're going to do this huge project, we need to make sure that we are doing it right. I think option 1 is the right way to approach it, as it always has been. This is the preferred option. This is the option that professional staff that are involved, have been involved in the planning of this project, many people with boots on the ground see this as the best way to proceed. I am concerned in option 3, and I understand the arguments for option 3, but I am concerned about it limiting our funding for other projects. I think that's a reality. And I certainly, as a sort of picky detail, I see no advantage, or even I don't think it's very wise to combine the fleet service with the administration area. To me, that doesn't make sense at all. So to me, option 1 was always the preferred way to go, and in my mind it still is, and I will support the motion that's on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. No more speakers left. I have a question regarding our borrowing limit. I understood from our Finance Committee meeting last week that we're at about 12.5. If we go with the full 90 million of the Phase 3 borrow, what will we be where will we be in terms of our limit? And I ask because there's a lot of conversation about if we decide to do Phase 3 and borrow that additional money, we're going to compromise other projects, and I'm not yet convinced that that's the case. I haven't seen those figures.
To the chair, so right now we have $61.8 million in our debt servicing availability, and we're at 13.5% of that. Or 12.3? 12.3. I can't see with my glasses on. So the debt servicing for option 3, we will get that number for you, and we'll tell you exactly what the impact of that is. Mm-hmm. I mean, from a debt servicing liability, the city has quite a bit of room. It just is there an appetite within the community to borrow that is maybe where that question comes into.
So what we're hearing and talking about at this table is about appetite from the community. It's not actual ability to borrow for the South End Rec Center, for the Waterfront Walk.
That's correct.
For the RCMP building.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have, depending on the amounts of all of those projects put together, I mean, that will obviously impact our debt servicing limit, but with the amount of money that we have allowable, it is likely all doable. It's just whether, is there an appetite to do that?
And one further question along those lines. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the city of Nanaimo sits at the lower threshold of what municipalities are borrowing right now. Like we're quite conservative.
Yeah, some are higher and have, like some are debt tolerant, right? And some don't like debt at all. But we don't have a high percentage of debt compared to some communities, for sure. Ms. Fuller hasn't, so $7.3 million is the debt, $7.3 million is the debt servicing limit on option number 3, and that would bring us up to, we're having some technical difficulties. It'll take her a minute, but I will get that for you.
Thank you. While that number is being searched for, I'll just state I'm kind of delightfully surprised. I thought I might be the only one who would argue for option 3. But I've been a full supporter of the project from day one. If we go with option 1 and status quo, I will be happy with that. However, I did appreciate that staff brought forward something new, something that addresses a major issue that I think we're going to face, and that's that as we're looking at these other potential borrowing opportunities for the South End Rec Center, for the Waterfront Walkway, for these major capital projects we know are on the horizon. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. That was silly. The admin building could very well be compromised in those circumstances as we're looking at those other options for borrowing and we're seeing our limit go up. I really like the economies of scale. The reorganization of buildings, I understand, is not optimal. Neither is having students in portables or pardon me, not students, staff in portables. Got school on the brain. I really appreciate the immediacy of this. And lastly, I very much appreciate the one and done concept. I don't think the community, I think a lot of confusion and uncertainty came from this idea that we were having phased borrowing over years, and that was an uncertain number. And so I like that I'm arguing for phase 3. I don't mean to do that. I'm arguing against phase 1 with the potential of going with phase 3. So Councillor Gesselbrock, you're back on the list.
Thank you. I think a question to staff. Given, I think the admin building was phase 2, I can't remember, but say if we just did phase 1, when would you anticipate the need to go ahead? When would the phase with the admin building be brought back? Like say, for example, we went to AAP for phase 1 now. When would the phase with the admin building be tentatively brought where we'd have to go out for AAP again on that?
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock. So the original master plan envisioned, I believe it was 4 phases. Phase 1 was the fleet maintenance building. Phase 2 was it was a smaller phase. It was some reorganization of some bulk materials and so on. It was more just moving the puzzle pieces around to be able to maintain a working yard. And I believe it was phase 4 where the admin building was actually going to be constructed. So, but if those intermediate phases, they're small enough that you don't even really need to think of them as they're more of an operational puzzle piece moving around. It's not a financial phase. It's a fairly small component that would just be part of the next step. The next step essentially would be the administration building.
Okay, and when would you anticipate that have to be reconsidered by council to do an AAP on it? Say if we just did the fleet maintenance building now, when would the admin building come again back to council to go through the borrowing and estimates on it and all that?
I think it's up to council, but I think in an ideal world, I think we would start considering the financial aspect of the next phase probably in 2026. trying to secure that in 2027, somewhere around there, with plus or minus a year or two.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gasselbrock. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologize for asking more questions. Constructing two buildings at one time would be immensely complicated. Is that what would happen if we went with option 3? Or would it be one and then the next?
Through the chair, I think, as Mr. Lonsdale indicated, it's slightly more complicated.
Yes.
You would have an economy of scale, excuse me, you'd have a contractor working on the site that would be handling both and sequencing the construction as needed. We wouldn't want to put this out to a contract to have two separate contractors occupying the same site. That would be complicated. But the economy of scale would allow the project to proceed without a great deal of undue complexity.
Okay. The problem that I have with this whole discussion is that I wish we'd seen option 3 a year ago, because it does make sense, the one and done idea, you know, it does make sense. So I really appreciated that you brought it today to us, because it's important to look at everything, and you've brought it forward, so that's helpful. My concern is, I think, as Mayor Krogan and Councillor Thorpe has talked about, is, you know, we've been talking about this project for a long period of time to the public, and I mean, I just think going back out and saying, oh, now we're going to pick another project, but it's actually double, is a dangerous move, and that really does concern me. I think I agree with Councillor Gasselbrock. Honest to God, we need it now, but I think it's really tough on the community to understand how you went from one, you had 2 AAPs, they both failed for different reasons. Now you're coming back and asking for a double the amount, even though we know at this table that it actually makes better sense. But I worry about how that perception is to the general public. And so I'm still going to vote for option 1. If it fails, I'm not sure what I'll do at that point, but I just think for us to get through option 1 with an AAP is just so important at this stage. I'd rather face the music down the road about the administration building. And I think it's unfortunate, because I think we should have done it option 3 to begin with, but you know what? Hindsight's 20/20. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Perino. Councillor Eastmere.
I mean, I feel like Councillor Perino just said it. You said option 3 makes better sense, and we know that around this table, so that's the answer. Like, we need to show the leadership now so that we're not pushing off the pain to a future council, which we may or may not be a part of, to deal with the administration building at that time, and you're asking for another AAP for more borrowing, instead of just communicating fully to the public now. This is going to be the ultimate cost of this project, to get all the pieces done, and we're never going to ask you about it again, and we're just going to get the project done knowing we have the urgent pieces that are required. And I just don't want to advance on this project without having the administration part as nailed down on this. And I constantly hear about Nanaimo's that we kind of do half a project and then the second half falls away, and we never finish anything. I would love to just get this done. And I think we can all do a good job of communicating to the public, and we all heard the same concerns that the phased project, people didn't understand it, and they really didn't like the uncertainty, and with cost escalations being what they are, being able to save $10 million by doing option 3 makes a lot of sense to me. So I really hope that we can support option 3 on this, and just make it easier on ourselves and on future councils going forward by doing the hard work that needs to be done now to see this project through to completion for all of the staff who work on that site.
Thank you, Councillor Eastmere. Ms. Mercer?
Thank you, Chair. So to update you, if you went with option 3, that would be about $7.3 million in annual debt funding, and that would bring you to about 24.1% of the debt servicing limit. So it doubles it a little bit. The other thing to keep in mind that will impact that as well, in 2026 and 2027, the debt on the Vancouver Island Conference Center drops off, so that will decrease that percentage as well.
Thank
as
you
those
very
renew.
much for that clarification. Okay, getting a new round of speakers, so new points only, please. Mr. Lindsay, did you want to say something? No? Sorry. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to staff. So option 3 is building both of these buildings concurrently. Option 1, we would have a second phase later on for the admin building, which would, you need, from what I heard from earlier on, you need at least a couple of years of separation. So you get one building started, you'd be working on the final drawings and everything else for the other building. The window, the borrowing window is 5 years, is that correct? So that's a little too short to do the 2 phases together. Is that why we're looking at option 3 instead of trying to do the buildings in the separate spots, the optimal spots?
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Manley, yes, the debt window is 5 years, so we need to be complete within 5 years. We can't have just kind of started on the next one. And, excuse me, one of the real reasons we're coming back with that option 3, as Mr. Sims said, was to provide council with the options that, you know, we were directed to explore. And the way that we arrived at option 3 was trying to balance the city's goals and needs, both financial and operational, with some of the feedback that we heard from the community. So that's how we ended up with option 3.
Right. Yeah, it's just a little, so the funding, the 5-year borrowing, you have to borrow all the money within 5 years? Does the project have to be completed within 5 years as well?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley, all the borrowing needs to be completed within 5 years of approval of the borrowing.
But you could borrow money and still be spending it in year 6.
Through the chair to Councillor Manley, correct. What we would, though, is we wouldn't want to borrow more than we need, so you'd want to, it wouldn't be the greatest situation to be starting a phase in the final year you can borrow, because then you'd be forced to borrow all the money, and then you might not actually need it, and once you borrow it, you can't give it back.
Right.
So you are paying debt servicing and interest on money that you potentially won't need. That's why we do the borrowing in stages.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. One and done, I feel like just rip the Band-Aid off and go. Anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. Mayor Cook?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I'll be very quick. One and done is a lovely slogan, but it's a slogan. Because if it's defeated, and you're with the so-called one and done, are you then prepared to go to a referendum and hope that the good citizens of Nanaimo happily spend $90 million on an operations center and et cetera? Not sure about that. I think I'd prefer a cautious approach.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmere?
Were we going to be renaming this project as the Public Works Yard? I thought that was going to be a big piece of it moving forward, because I think the Operations Center name was actually really difficult for people to wrap their heads around, and I would really love for the communication strategy on this to be able to share with people exactly what it is, because I think there's overlap between the Emergency Operations Center, and it doesn't make sense to people when we say that. But Public Works Yard is a very easy to understand term, and I hope we can move forward with that.
Mr. Chair, we're conscious of not creating confusion around flipping the name in the middle of all of this discussion, but I think we're going to start blending in the Public Works Yard facility into the communications as well, just so it supports that. But I think we want to not back away from the original concept of the Operations Center.
I feel like every time you talk to the public about it, we were like, the Operations Center, Public Works Yard, like, because we had to explain what it actually meant, and it makes more sense on a basic level of what we're actually asking for, and everyone understands the importance of a Public Works Yard. Operations facility is like a bit diaphanous.
Thank you, Councillor Eastmere. I don't have anyone else on the speakers list, so the motion in front of us is to proceed with the status quo and the previously proposed funding options. All those in favor? I see Mayor Krogh, Councillor Thorpe, and Councillor Perino. I don't see Councillor Brown online. He's no longer with us. Those opposed? Opposed are Councillor Eastmere, Councillor Gazabrock, Councillor Hemmens, and Councillor Manley. That fails. Would someone care to make an alternate motion? Is there a seconder? Councillor Eastmere has seconded option 3. Any discussion or debate? Seeing that, Mayor Krogh, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to stick with option 1 in the sense I'll be voting against this option, keeping in mind this will be back at a full council meeting. This is just the GPC, so we shall see where we go with this when Councillor Armstrong is present as well and Councillor Brown are here to vote.
Thank you. I think we're all aware of that. Councillor Gazabrock?
Great, yeah, just supportive of this option. I think it's cheaper, I think it's less confusing, and it meets our needs that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gazabrock. Any further question? Councillor Perino?
Sorry, Chair. I don't disagree, but I think we're asking too much of the public at this time, and I'm very concerned that this could fail as an AAP. That's my concern. I like the leadership. I like the options. I'm concerned. I'll be voting against it for that reason, but I don't disagree with you.
Thank you, Councillor Perino. Councillor Manley?
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the big lessons from the first AAP was about communications. And I think staff did an excellent job on communications in the second AAP. And I thought the Public Works Yard tours and the sessions in Country Club were excellent. And I think that with good communication and really emphasizing the cost savings of doing this, I think that that we can get the public behind it. I think that a lot of the criticism was based on the unknowns of those other phases and the costs of borrowing for the other phases. And I would also like to see us use some of the reserve funds towards this project as well. So I think that it's worth taking the leadership and pushing through and getting this over the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. And just for my own reference, and I think anyone listening or paying attention today, it's important because we're talking about such monstrous numbers to put it into actual dollar figures. So if this passes here and this passes through council, the average homeowner can expect an increase in their taxes of $139 per year to get both buildings done. So I just want to put that into dollar figures that we can all understand and grasp. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? I see Councillor Eastmere, Councillor Gazabrock, Councillor Hemmens, and Councillor Manley. Those opposed? Mayor Krogh, Councillor Thorpe, and Councillor Perino. That passes. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Mercer, go ahead.
I'm just wanting to see where the committee is sitting at. Would you prefer to fund the debt from taxation, or would you like staff to come back with some options with the mix between reserves and taxation?
I'm hearing and seeing two things. Can I have speakers, please? Councillor Perino, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and through to you, to Ms. Mercer. The struggle that I have with using funds from asset management is we need those funds for when we have emergencies. We also will need the funds from the other projects that Mr. Rosen and Mr. Longsdale were talking about. So we're going to need to make sure that we save those funds. So if we do go ahead with option 3, for me, we need to borrow the entire amount and get those other projects that Mr. Rosen, Mr. Longsdale, and Mr. Sims were talking about, get those done so that we don't have to borrow again. So it is truly the one and done slogan.
Thank you. Councillor Perino, Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a clear decision on this yet, but I would appreciate having information from staff about what those options look like, and so we can have that for a future decision point. Thank you.
Clear? Great. Okay. myself those. I see no question period prompting.
Madam Chair, I think I would appreciate if there was a recommendation from the committee for council to consider that staff look at other options with respect to debt servicing. If I got the wording right, Ms. Mercer.
Great. Councillor Eastmere has made that motion. Councillor Manley has seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Gurry? No? Okay, thank you. Could I have a motion for adjournment, please? Mayor Krogh and Councillor Perino, all those in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Go Oilers!